When Eddie Van Halen turned 65, fans expected reflection, nostalgia, maybe even reconciliation. Instead, they got a bombshell. In a candid interview, the guitar legend dropped a searing critique of longtime bassist Michael Anthony. "I had to show him every note." The music world exploded. Was it bitterness? A final truth? For decades, Michael had stood silently in Eddie's shadow, the quiet rhythm beneath Van Halen's thunder. Now, with one quote, that silence was shattered. What followed wasn't just a feud reignited. It was a re-examination of loyalty, legacy, and the quiet power of the bassist who refused to bite back. Opening on the stage of betrayal. It began with a line that shocked even the most devoted Van Halen fans. In a 2015 interview, just shy of his 65th birthday, Eddie Van Halen didn't mince words. "I had to show him every note he played," he said, speaking about Michael Anthony, his bandmate of over 3 decades. With that one sentence, the myth of brotherhood within Van Halen began to crack. For years, fans had seen Michael Anthony as the band's quiet backbone, a loyal team player who never sought the spotlight. Eddie's sudden criticism didn't just sting, it stunned. He claimed Michael's musicianship lacked initiative. He described him not as a singer, but simply someone with a range. Then, with hardly a pause, he celebrated his son Wolfgang's role in replacing Michael, calling it a necessary evolution. The backlash was immediate. Sammy Hagar, Michael's longtime ally and former Van Halen frontman, exploded on social media. He accused Eddie of rewriting history and questioned why someone so pivotal would be painted as inadequate. "Most dedicated guy I ever met," Hagar snapped. The fans seemed to agree. This wasn't just a backstage squabble. It was a public rewriting of one of rock's greatest legacies. And Michael Anthony, always the quiet one, was suddenly at the heart of a storm he never asked for. Michael Anthony, the backbone. Long before the headlines, before the finger-pointing, Michael Anthony Sobolewski was just a kid from Chicago with a trumpet in his hand. Raised in California, he taught himself bass, forged a love for harmony, and unknowingly set the stage for rock history. In 1974, after a jam session with the Van Halen brothers, he was invited to join a band that would change everything. Michael wasn't flashy. He didn't crave center stage, but he was consistent. He was reliable. And most importantly, his high harmonies became a signature part of Van Halen's sound, an often overlooked but irreplaceable ingredient. Nicknamed the flag bearer, Michael was the guy who showed up on time, played it right, and didn't stir the pot. His solid bass lines grounded Eddie's wild guitar wizardry. He was the stability in a band that thrived on chaos. And for a time, he was an equal partner, financially, creatively, emotionally. Fans saw it. Bandmates knew it. And yet, years later, his role would be questioned by the very man whose music he helped define. Rising star, equal partner, until 1984. In the golden years, Michael was more than just a member. He was a stakeholder. With a 20% equity share and credits on every album from Van Halen I to 1984, he stood alongside Eddie, Alex, and David Lee Roth as a full-fledged partner in one of rock's most dominant acts. Those records sold millions. Tours sold out. And through it all, Michael remained the quiet anchor amid raging personalities. While Eddie shredded and Dave strutted, Michael held the groove. Behind the scenes, his role extended to arranging, harmonizing, and helping manage the chaos. But by 1984, cracks began to show. The band's internal tension, Creative, personal, financial, boiled over. And for Michael, it marked the beginning of something darker. A shift was coming, and he wouldn't see it until it hit him full force. The 1984 contract, blow selling rights in a hallway. It was backstage on the 1984 tour. The band had reached new heights, but behind the curtain, things had grown toxic. In a moment that would come to define Michael's loyalty and his regret, he was allegedly handed a contract in a hallway and asked to sign away future royalties and credits. According to former manager Noel Monk, the band was lying on the floor, pressuring Michael to comply. And he did, to keep the peace, to keep the tour alive, to avoid being the one to derail the machine. The aftermath was brutal. He was stripped retroactively of credits on one of the biggest albums of the decade. Income dried up. Influence disappeared. What was once a partnership had now become a silent sacrifice. Michael never went public with anger. But the cost? Millions lost. A legacy damaged. He chose the high road. But that road led away from power and toward erasure. Eddie's explosive accusation at a 65. Decades passed. Van Halen's lineup shifted. Reunions came and went. But in 2015, Eddie reignited old wounds in that infamous interview. He never wrote anything. I had to teach him every part, every note. It wasn't just a dig. It was a rewrite of history. Eddie praised Wolfgang as a better bassist. He dismissed Michael's voice, his presence, and even his relevance. Fans were divided. Some clung to Eddie's genius. Others defended Michael, now seen as the loyal soldier left behind. The betrayal hit hard. Michael had never attacked anyone publicly. He'd never claimed more than his due. But suddenly, he was being erased by the very man he'd supported for 30 years. This wasn't just about who played what. It was about truth. And for the first time, Michael Anthony's quiet dignity was being drowned out by someone else's microphone. Sammy Hagar. Lashes. Back when Eddie Van Halen's interview hit the airwaves, it wasn't Michael Anthony who spoke first. It was Sammy Hagar, the Red Rocker himself, who threw down the gauntlet. For years, Sammy had shared the stage with both Eddie and Michael, and in his eyes, there was no question. Loyalty, work ethic, and musical integrity all pointed to Michael. The moment Eddie claimed he had to show Michael every note, Sammy exploded. "That's a lie, and Eddie knows it," he fired back. His words weren't just reactive, they were protective. To Sammy, Michael wasn't just a bassist. He was the heartbeat of Van Halen's live sound, the guy who held the harmonies together when the rest of the band went off the rails. Sammy reminded fans of Michael's tireless presence on tour, of how he never missed a show, how he rehearsed even when the others didn't. He carried the flag every night, Sammy said. And in doing so, he reminded the world that Michael's worth couldn't be measured in riffs or solos. It lived in the backbone of the band's very soul. The feud escalated. The media picked sides. But one thing was clear. Sammy wasn't going to let Eddie rewrite the legacy unchecked. And in the middle of the noise, Michael Anthony stayed silent. But not for long. Michael's measured rebuttal. When Michael Anthony finally addressed the comments made by Eddie Van Halen, the rock world expected fireworks, some wild counterattack or a public feud reborn. But Michael didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He didn't dig up old wounds or throw mud. Instead, he did something that stunned even his most loyal fans. He took the high road. "It hurt, sure," he admitted in a rare interview, But I've always believed in taking the high road. That one sentence set the tone. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a masterclass in grace. Rather than engage in a back and forth with the late guitarist, Michael calmly reminded the world who he was and what he'd contributed. He spoke with measured dignity, not emotional spite. He talked about the decades of touring, the countless hours spent in rehearsal, the late nights in studios, the chaos of the road, and the loyalty he showed through it all. He didn't have to defend himself. His work spoke volumes, but he did choose to clarify, to set the record straight, without ever once needing to tear anyone down. He reminded fans that his high harmonies were just as iconic as Eddie's guitar solos, that his bass lines were the glue holding the band's volatile brilliance together. Most importantly, he addressed the human cost, not just the musical one. This wasn't just about music, it was personal, he said. And in that quiet truth, fans finally understood the depth of what had been lost. Not just creative synergy, but a long-held friendship. The public sided with him almost instantly. Social media lit up with posts praising his humility. Rock forums became flooded with tributes to Michael's integrity. People dug out old live clips and noticed things they hadn't before. How often he kept the rhythm tight when others improvised. How seamlessly he sang those falsetto harmonies over the roar of the guitars. They saw it now, not just as the bass player, but as the backbone of Van Halen's classic sound. Michael didn't need to lash out to be heard. By staying silent for so long and then choosing his words with care, he achieved something far more powerful: respect. "I still love that music, and I'm proud of what we built," he said softly. That line, simple and honest, landed harder than any insult could have. It reminded fans what really mattered. Not the drama, not the credit, not the backstage battles. What mattered was the music, the connection, the legacy. Michael Anthony's response was not just a rebuttal. It was a statement of character. And in an industry that often rewards chaos, his calm became revolutionary. The quiet fade out. Michael Anthony's departure from Van Halen wasn't marked by drama or headlines. There was no explosive breakup, no televised press conference, no slam of the door. Instead, it was a slow, quiet fade. A ghosting, not a goodbye. By the time Van Halen III dropped in 1998, something had changed. Michael was barely there. He played bass on only 3 out of 11 tracks, with Eddie Van Halen stepping in to cover the rest. For a man who had been the rhythmic foundation of the band for over 2 decades, this was more than just a scheduling change. It was the beginning of his quiet removal from the very band he helped build. There was no announcement, no public explanation, just silence. In 2004, when Best of Both Worlds was released, supposedly a celebration of Van Halen's legacy, Michael was again pushed further to the margins. He wasn't invited to record any of the new songs on the compilation. Instead, he was brought on the reunion tour as a hired musician, not a full-fledged band member. He played the hits, stood under the lights, and smiled for the fans. But behind the scenes, he was no longer part of the Brotherhood. The final devastating blow came in 2006, when Eddie announced that his son Wolfgang Van Halen, then just 15, would take over as the band's bassist. Michael wasn't consulted. He wasn't even called. He learned about it like everyone else, through online news reports. One day, he was Van Halen's backbone. The next, he was airbrushed out of the family photo. No call, no meeting, no goodbye, fans would later say. It was an erasure, not a transition. For fans, it was heartbreaking. Michael's high harmonies, thunderous bass lines and steady presence had helped shape the Van Halen sound. He wasn't flashy, but he was essential. Watching him disappear quietly and without cause felt like losing a part of the band's soul. And for Michael Anthony, it was more than a professional loss. It was the end of a creative family. He'd stood on stage with Eddie and Alex for decades, shared triumphs, shared grief, shared a dream. Yet, through it all, he never lashed out. He didn't go to the press with scandal. He didn't write a tell-all book. Instead, he just kept playing. "I still love the music. That's what it's always been about for me," he said. But make no mistake, the silence between him and Eddie spoke volumes, louder than any amplifier ever could. Wolfgang's rise, Michael's erasure. When Wolfgang Van Halen stepped onto the stage in 2006 as Van Halen's new bassist, the official story was one of legacy, family, and a new chapter. Eddie Van Halen beamed with pride, his teenage son joining the very band he built with his brother. But behind the scenes, for Michael Anthony, the moment marked something far more painful: erasure. There was no formal goodbye, no tribute, no call. "I found out, like everyone else, through the internet," Michael would later admit. After decades of dedication, every tour, every harmony, every thundering bass line, his dismissal was silent and cold. A band he helped define had quietly replaced him with a bloodline. Eddie, in interviews, portrayed it as a symbolic passing of the torch. He wanted to play with his son. He spoke of it as family first, a chance to build something new with someone who shared his DNA and his passion. But for many fans, it felt like a rewrite of history. It felt like loyalty had been substituted for lineage. The live shows that followed barely referenced Michael's legacy. Set lists changed, credits were quietly altered, and Wolfgang took his place not just on stage, but in the story. For a band that once thrived on chemistry and camaraderie, the shift felt abrupt, like tearing a page out of a beloved book and pretending it had never been there. Michael, ever the professional, chose dignity over drama. He issued no public jabs, no bitter interviews. Instead, he wished Wolfgang the best and walked his own path. "He's a talented kid, and I hope he does great things," he said once, with a quiet grace that only made his absence from the band more glaring. But for those who had followed Van Halen from smoky bars to sold-out arenas, the change couldn't be ignored. Michael's harmonies had shaped their sound. His stage presence had grounded their chaos. Erasing him wasn't just a lineup change, it was a rewriting of identity. Over time, Wolfgang proved himself, an excellent musician in his own right, forging his own path with Mammoth WVH. But the way Michael was removed still hangs in the air for many fans. Not because Wolfgang didn't earn his place, but because Michael never got the respect or farewell he deserved. In the end, it wasn't just about bass. It was about memory, about legacy, and about the space one man leaves behind when he's quietly pushed out of a band he helped create. Michael Anthony didn't just lose his spot. He lost his history with Van Halen, not through failure, but through silence. Michael reboots with Sammy Hagar. After being sidelined by the band he helped build, Michael Anthony could have disappeared into rock and roll history. But he didn't. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He rose again, not as a relic of Van Halen's past, but as a new force in his own right. His comeback wasn't quiet. It came roaring back with Sammy Hagar by his side. In 2002, Michael and Sammy launched the Other Half Tour, a symbolic name that spoke volumes. These were the two men often overshadowed during the height of Van Halen's fame. Now reclaiming the stage and reviving the classics fans thought they'd never hear live again. From Why Can't This Be Love to Best of Both Worlds, Michael's bass lines thumped with renewed energy, his harmonies soaring just as they had in the band's golden days. But this was just the beginning. Michael joined the hard-hitting supergroup Planet Us, alongside legends like Joe Satriani and Neil Schon, exploring heavier sounds and proving his musical range. Then came Chickenfoot in 2008, the band that made fans and critics alike take notice. With Hagar, Satriani, and Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the band became a critical and commercial success, releasing albums that landed on the Billboard charts and reigniting rock fans everywhere. Michael wasn't chasing relevance. He was embodying it. His performances were tight, his tone razor-sharp, his energy undiminished. "I wasn't trying to prove anything, just play what I love," he said in an interview, his voice humble, his intent clear. There was no bitterness, no score settling, just music, just joy. By 2014, he joined Sammy Hagar and the Circle, a band that dug even deeper into legacy and creativity. Their debut album, Space Between, debuted at 4 on the Billboard 200, a stunning achievement that silenced any lingering doubt. Michael wasn't just relevant, he was thriving. And through it all, he remained gracious. He often said, "I'm just thankful I still get to do this. The stage is home." No tabloid drama, no venom, just a quiet rebirth built on talent, friendship, and an undying love for the music that started it all. Michael Anthony, once cast aside, now stood center stage, not in anyone's shadow, but in his own well-earned spotlight, and he wore it with grace. Reunion plans dashed. In the wake of Eddie Van Halen's death in 2020, the world held its breath. Could there be one final show? A tribute? A reunion? A moment of closure? Whispers swirled about a farewell tour, one that would bring together David Lee Roth, Wolfgang Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and yes, Michael Anthony. It was the dream fans had begged for. A stage lit one last time, guitars screaming, harmonies blending, wounds healing under the lights. And Michael, he was in. "If they called, I'd be there," he said in a rare interview, his voice steady with years of quiet loyalty. But fate wasn't as kind. David Lee Roth hesitated. He wasn't interested in a tribute act, not even for Eddie. He saw himself as an artist, not a relic. A reunion without purpose, he believed, was just noise. Meanwhile, Alex, the band's engine, had retreated from the spotlight. Rumors of his health issues surfaced, making it clear he wasn't ready, mentally or physically, for a demanding return. And Wolfgang, young, grieving, and fiercely protective, wasn't about to commercialize his father's legacy. To him, the idea of a tribute had to be genuine, not a cash grab. He held the archives, the unreleased recordings, the emotional key to it all. Without his blessing, the reunion couldn't happen. The months passed. Hope faded. And in the end, there was no send-off, no encore, just silence. For Michael Anthony, it was a final chapter that never got written. He was ready. The fans were ready. But destiny turned the page without them. What should have been a celebration became another heartbreak, a final blow in a story filled with nearlies and never-agains. Family versus fame, biopic block and legacy control. Even in death, Eddie Van Halen's story is guarded like sacred ground. As rumors of a Van Halen biopic gained traction, fans braced themselves for the ultimate retelling: the rise, the brilliance, the chaos, and the tragedy. But just as quickly as the idea sparked, it was shut down by those closest to him. Valerie Bertinelli, Eddie's ex-wife and mother to Wolfgang, made her position clear: no biopic while I'm alive. She wasn't being cold, she was being protective. This wasn't just about storytelling, it was about preserving a legacy from being turned into a spectacle. No bad wigs, no drug montages, no watered-down Hollywood myth. Wolfgang stood by her. "It has to be done right," he said. To him, Eddie's legacy was more than music. It was a life of depth, contradiction, and genius. Too often, legends are flattened into caricatures. He refused to let that happen to his father. Behind the scenes, projects were paused, offers declined, studio doors quietly closed. Unreleased tapes stayed locked in vaults. The goal wasn't profit, it was preservation. Michael Anthony, watching from a distance, understood. He respected the need to protect Eddie's image. But the exclusions stung. The history they'd lived together, the stadiums, the hotels, the family they once were. It wasn't just Eddie's. It was his, too. And now, it was in someone else's hands. This quiet war between family and fame, between memory and money, keeps Eddie's story suspended in limbo. The question now isn't whether it will be told, but how, and by whom. After the exposure, what this all means. As the years pass and the noise fades, one truth stands tall. Michael Anthony survived Van Halen's firestorm and came out stronger. What began as betrayal evolved into redemption. Once painted as expendable, Michael is now celebrated as irreplaceable. Fans see him clearly. The harmonist, the anchor, the quiet warrior who never stopped showing up. Eddie Van Halen's 2015 comments reopened wounds, but they also opened eyes. "I had to show him every note," Eddie said, words that echoed with resentment. But Michael never responded in anger. He let time speak, and in time, it did. His silence became its own revolution. While others lashed out, Michael built. Bands like Chickenfoot and The Circle gave him new ground. His legacy no longer hinged on approval from the Van Halen name. It stood on its own. Meanwhile, Eddie's legend grew more complex. The genius who shaped modern rock was also deeply human, prone to pride, pain, and contradictions. His family's grip on his story is understandable, but it also narrows the lens. In trying to preserve him, they may have locked others out. But fans remember more. They remember the sound of Michael's harmonies, the steadiness of his rhythm, the quiet smile beneath the chaos. He wasn't just a player. He was the pulse. Now, after all the revelations, all the grief, all the silence, Michael Anthony finally has his voice back. And this time, the whole world is listening. In the end, Eddie's exposure didn't silence Michael. It amplified him. The truth came out, but so did the respect. Decades of harmony, tension, and buried wounds finally surfaced. And while Eddie's voice may be gone, Michael's has never been louder. His story, once muted, now plays loud and clear.